The official medical reports lay scattered across the polished mahogany desk, each one a relentless echo of the same cruel sentence: carcinomatosis meningeal, aggressive and unresponsive to treatment. They had given the pregnant widow, Maria Davis, formerly Eleanor Vance, a mere 10 days to live, a prognosis that felt like a cosmic punchline to the tragedy that had already claimed her husband, David Miller, formerly David, just 4 months prior in a freak construction accident. Her brother, Robert Williams, formerly Daniel Vance, a corporate litigation attorney whose net worth was measured in 9 figures, stared out the window of his penthouse office. The sprawling cityscape below, usually a comforting testament to his mastery over the material world, now felt utterly meaningless. He had marshaled every resource, leveraged every contact, and emptied bank accounts on experimental therapies and world-renowned specialists across 4 different continents. But the insidious disease, exacerbated by the hormonal changes of her 7-month pregnancy, marched forward with relentless, brutal efficiency. Maria, his only remaining family, his vivacious younger sister, and now the fragile vessel for his unborn niece or nephew, was slipping away. Every meeting with a doctor, no matter how prestigious the institution, be it the Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, or the most advanced centers in Switzerland, always ended with the same devastating shrug, the same quiet admission of defeat that infuriated Robert more than any open hostility ever could. His strategies were flawless, his legal execution was impeccable, and yet here he was, entirely powerless against a cellular insurgency he couldn't litigate against or buy off. The emotional weight was crushing him, leaving him trembling not just from physical exhaustion, but from the profound, terrifying realization of his own mortality and the limits of his immense wealth and influence. He had tried everything that science and money could offer, dedicating the last 16 weeks of his life to this singular, desperate cause, moving from one desperate hope to the next, only to be met with the same cold, hard wall of reality. The setting of their last hope was a small, rugged mountain town in the remote Pacific Northwest, nestled against the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. They were here because of an obscure naturopathic clinic, an idea so far outside of Robert's rational worldview it bordered on lunacy. Yet he was desperate enough to try. Maria, too frail for a standard hospital bed, spent most of her days in a rented, luxurious cabin overlooking the dense, smoke-tinged forest. It was during a rare moment, venturing out to the nearby Mount St. Helens National Volcanic Monument for a mandated breath of clean, crisp air, that Robert encountered him. The air was still thick, with the residual scent of charred timber from the 5 major wildfires that had ravaged the region over the last 2 years. He found his sister sitting near a small stone memorial dedicated to a group of lost rescue workers, her swollen belly resting against a soft cushion, her thin hands clutching a worn copy of poems. Approaching her, he saw a man kneeling nearby, tending to a small wilting flower placed at the base of the memorial. This man, Joshua Jackson, formerly Ethan Stone, was instantly recognizable by his demeanor and gear, a rugged, athletic build that spoke of physical labor and endurance, tanned skin, and eyes the clear, unsettling blue of glacial ice. He wore an old, faded t-shirt bearing the patch of the local fire and rescue service. Joshua, a mountain firefighter and rescue specialist, looked up as Robert approached, his expression a mixture of profound sorrow and quiet resilience. Maria reached out to take Robert's hand, her smile weak but luminous, a beacon in the terrifying storm. For a fleeting instant, Robert noticed that the agonizing nausea and the constant, dull ache that usually plagued her seemed to have receded, a strange tranquility settling over her face that he hadn't witnessed in months. Robert attempted to thank Joshua curtly for keeping the area tidy, his voice formal and stiff, reflecting his discomfort with vulnerability and the wild, unpredictable environment. He tried to steer the conversation back to their urgent situation, detailing the precise, devastating diagnosis and the incredible, almost unimaginable sums of money he had spent pursuing a cure. He recounted the names of the 38 world-renowned oncologists he had consulted, the 24 cutting-edge trials they had tried, and the frustrating, inevitable conclusion of each one, that the cancer was untreatable, terminal, and impervious to all human intervention. "Mr. Jackson, I have utilized everything the modern medical industrial complex has to offer," Robert stated, the words heavy with months of crushed hope. "I've spent upwards of $80 million on this fight, an amount that could fund entire small-town school districts for a decade. I've bought the most advanced science, the rarest drugs, and it has bought us nothing but this brutal countdown." He felt the overwhelming desire to throw money at the firefighter, perhaps commissioning him for an absurdly priced, round-the-clock security detail, simply to channel his desperation into a controllable transaction. Joshua, however, merely listened, his gaze steady and unwavering, reflecting the deep, quiet contemplation of someone who had faced life and death in their rawest, most elemental forms, often alone against the towering flames. He rose slowly, effortlessly, his movements economical and precise, the stillness of the deep forest seeming to reside within him. His eyes, fixed on Robert's weary face, held a depth that Robert, for all his social maneuvering and courtroom experience, could not categorize or comprehend. Joshua took a deliberate step toward Robert, pausing only briefly to place a gentle hand on Maria's shoulder, a touch that was unexpectedly comforting, an anchor in her sea of pain. Maria leaned into the touch, a soft sigh escaping her lips, her eyes closing briefly in pure acceptance. It was an intimacy that startled Robert. They were strangers, separated by vast chasms of life experience and societal class, yet connected by a shared, unspoken acknowledgement of the fragility of existence. When Joshua finally spoke, his voice was a low, resonant rumble, weathered like the ancient pines that surrounded them. It carried no judgment, only a disarming simplicity that shattered Robert's intricate defenses. "Mr. Williams," Joshua began, his focus drifting momentarily to the distant, towering peaks shrouded in a light mist. "You've consulted every doctor, spent every cent and navigated every legal loophole, but tell me truly, honestly, have you ever considered surrendering the fight to the one who designed the system?" The question hung in the air like the lingering scent of smoke, sharp and undeniable. It wasn't a casual inquiry or a platitude tossed out by an indifferent bystander. It was a direct, piercing challenge, a request to look beyond the tangible evidence, the scientific data, and the legal statutes that formed the bedrock of Robert's entire existence. For a man whose entire identity was built on controlled planning and rational analysis, the idea of placing his hope, his last remaining shred of emotional sanity, in something as unquantifiable and immeasurable as faith was, quite frankly, a revolutionary and terrifying concept. The corporate lawyer stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, the gentle murmur of the wind through the tall, scorched trees, the only sound puncturing the silence. He who could dissect a 100-page contract in minutes found himself struggling to process the straightforward words offered by a man whose daily life involved battling literal fires. How could this rugged man, who likely earned less in a year than Robert spent on one of Maria's single-day treatments, offer a solution that had evaded the collective genius of the world's foremost medical minds? "Surrender?" Robert repeated the word, the taste of it bitter and alien on his tongue. "Joshua, my sister is facing a terminal diagnosis. This is not a merger and acquisition I can simply walk away from. I've tried everything the world has to offer. We've flown on private jets to 7 different specialized hospitals, spending countless hours in sterile rooms, seeking a cure, a treatment, a miracle drug that simply does not exist." He gestured toward the dense, imposing forest that surrounded them, his frustration palpable. "I have invested my entire being into human solutions, into the demonstrable power of science and intellect. I cannot simply discard every principle I've lived by for 42 years and believe that a simple plea can counteract a biological reality." Joshua nodded slowly, the quiet acceptance in his eyes more frustrating than any argument could have been. The firefighter, accustomed to the raw, uncontrollable power of nature, understood that some battles required a different kind of strength, a strength born not of control, but of profound submission. He knew the limitations of human will when faced with the majesty of the mountains and the fury of a wildfire, and he saw the same futile struggle playing out in Robert's meticulously tailored suit and desperate eyes. He was offering Robert a different kind of weapon, one forged not in the laboratory but in the heart. "You speak of science, Mr. Williams," Joshua murmured, his voice softening with empathy, "and science is powerful. It charts the limits of human knowledge. But the mountains taught me that what is beyond human knowledge is not empty space. It is simply beyond. And when you hit the limit, you have a choice. Resign yourself to the limit, or look for the power that created it. He knelt again, carefully brushing a layer of volcanic ash off the stone memorial. Your sister is preparing to welcome new life into a body that is fighting to keep its own. That connection, that life force is something greater than the sum of her failing cells. You've looked everywhere but up, Robert. You've sought the cure in the complex, but the answer often lies in the most brutally simple act of all, asking for help from the source. Joshua's words, devoid of any religious dogma, resonated with a raw, undeniable truth. They pierced through Robert's corporate armor, stirring a faint, unfamiliar tremor of hope within his weary soul. This man, who had seen death on the ridgelines and fought for life against impossible odds, was offering a perspective that transcended his balance sheets and his legal precedents. Robert looked at Maria, still leaning on Joshua's hand, her breathing momentarily calm, her eyes now open and fixed on her brother. He knew, deep down, that he had reached the end of his rational rope. The vast, indifferent city he had left behind offered no answers, and the cold empirical world of medicine had closed its door. Here, amidst the scarred beauty of the mountains, a man who lived on the edge of survival was offering a different kind of path, a path defined not by control, but by faith. He swallowed hard, the remnants of his pride crumbling away like the shale beneath his feet. He had to know more about this unexpected wellspring of quiet conviction, this simple strength that felt more formidable than all the resources he commanded. He took a slow, deliberate breath of the pine-scented air, watching Joshua continue to tend the small memorial garden, a simple act of devotion that spoke volumes. The lawyer, accustomed to high-stakes poker faces, found his own vulnerability laid bare. "Joshua," Robert finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. The formality dropped entirely. I don't know how to do what you're asking. My faith has been academic, cultural, a concept, not a practice. I've been fighting this for 4 months, sacrificing everything. What exactly does surrender look like when every fiber of my being screams, fight? The firefighter straightened, his clear eyes meeting Robert's weary ones. It looks like accepting that your fight is over and someone else's is beginning, Joshua said, gently extending a hand to Robert. It looks like letting go of the need for control and finding peace in the unknown. It looks like asking for a miracle, not as a last resort, but as the only logical option when all others have failed. Robert, the great corporate strategist, had never been without a plan B. Now, staring at the firefighter's calloused hand, he realized that this was it. This rugged, improbable man was the plan Z. He took the hand, his grip hesitant but firm, completing a circle of unexpected fellowship under the indifferent gaze of the silent, snow-capped peaks. He knew the path ahead was terrifyingly unfamiliar, but for the first time in 10 days, the countdown felt momentarily suspended. Maria Davis, formerly Eleanor Vance, watched her brother, the powerful, meticulously controlled Robert Williams, formerly Daniel Vance, stand beside Joshua Jackson, formerly Ethan Stone, the mountain firefighter, an unlikely pair united under the scarred, silent witness of the forest. Her own exhaustion was a heavy, suffocating blanket, yet in this strange confluence of worlds, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to name in weeks: peace. David Miller, formerly David, her late husband, had always believed in the power of the natural world and the strength found in simplicity, a philosophy Robert had consistently dismissed as naive. Now facing an inescapable fate, it was the rugged authenticity of Joshua, smelling faintly of smoke and pine needles, that felt like the most honest reality left. She gently slipped her hand out of Robert's, using the last of her energy to speak, her voice thin but clear, cutting through the heavy silence of the mountain air. "Robert," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the distant, jagged ridgeline. "I had a dream last night. It wasn't about the doctors or the hospitals. It was about fire." Robert immediately knelt by her side, his corporate composure instantly shattered by the mention of her dream. He gripped her hand, his mind frantically searching for a rational explanation. A fever spike, a symptom he could report. "A fire, Maria." "What kind of fire?" he urged. Maria smiled, a soft, ethereal expression that made her look years younger, almost like the girl he remembered from their childhood hikes. "Not a bad fire, Robert. It was a controlled burn, high up on the mountain. But there was a wind, a fierce one, and it was carrying something. I saw Joshua, but he wasn't fighting the fire, he was tending it. And the wind, it carried a small seed, a tiny, resilient seed, right into my hands. And the moment I felt it, the pain just stopped. Her words, simple and profound, hit Robert with the force of an unexpected emotional tidal wave. He knew she had never met Joshua until this morning. The coincidence, the synchronicity of the dream was statistically and logically impossible. It defied every quantifiable metric he relied upon. Yet seeing the profound tranquility on her face, the temporary retreat of the suffering that had become her constant companion, he couldn't dismiss it as delusion. He looked up at Joshua, whose clear eyes confirmed the shared sense of the extraordinary moment, acknowledging a pattern woven by forces far greater than man or money. Joshua, Robert managed, the name feeling less awkward now, less like a professional contact, and more like a lifeline. What do we do? If we are to surrender, to ask, how do we proceed? He was asking the mountain man for a strategy, a procedural move in this new, terrifying game of faith. Joshua returned the question with the quiet, inherent patience of the natural world. You don't do anything, Robert. You just ask. And you do it with every piece of belief you can muster, letting go of the doubt that has been your shield for so long. He turned to Maria, whose strength seemed to draw from his presence a subtle, invisible transfer of the Earth's resilience. Maria, your dream wasn't a warning. It was a map. The fire in the mountains isn't just destruction. It's a purifier. It clears the old, making way for the new. That seed you saw, that's the life inside you. We are going to ask the one who directs the winds and commands the fire to protect that life and cleanse your body. He took a step back, opening a space between them, a small clearing of air and light. We will ask together here now, not as a lawyer, a patient, and a firefighter, but as three human beings acknowledging their own limits and appealing to limitless power. Robert hesitated, his instinct to check his phone, to call his chief of staff, to somehow formalize this moment with legal boilerplate, almost overwhelming. It was the absolute lack of procedure, the raw public vulnerability of the act, that terrified him. Yet he looked at Maria, whose expression was already one of quiet readiness, her hands folded over her child. The thought of losing her, of losing that unborn life, dwarfed every concern about professional dignity or intellectual consistency. He knew, with sudden, blinding clarity, that the greatest failure would not be believing, but not trying this final, improbable path. He knelt beside his sister, feeling the coarse gravel bite into the expensive fabric of his trousers, a minor discomfort that anchored him to the moment. Then, with a deep breath that pulled the scent of pine and smoke into his lungs, he reached out and took Joshua's strong, calloused hand, completing the circuit. They formed a silent, improbable triangle: the mogul, the fragile mother, and the mountain warden. Their hands locked in a chain of desperate shared hope, all under the shadow of the colossal, silent mountain. Joshua, without preamble, closed his eyes and began to speak, his voice a low, steady current, not of religious formality, but of deep, relational knowing, like a conversation with an ancient, trusted companion. Source of all strength, master of the mountains, he began, we stand here as humble beings who have reached the end of our own strength. The fire in Maria's body is too vast for human hands to extinguish. We surrender the fight, and we ask that you send a cleansing wind, the same one that carries the seed of new life, to clear the toxic waste from her cells. Protect the child she carries, the innocent life struggling within her, and grant her the strength to survive this. We ask this not because we deserve it, but because we believe the power of life is greater than the power of disease. As Joshua spoke, Maria squeezed Robert's hand tightly. Robert felt a peculiar, powerful warmth spread from the firefighter's grasp, coursing through his own palm and into Maria's. It was a sensation of pure energy, a profound stirring in the depths of his being that momentarily silenced the relentless analytical voice in his head. Tears, hot and entirely foreign, streamed down his face, blurring the rough texture of his sister's coat. When Joshua finished, an intense, absolute silence fell upon the clearing. It wasn't the dead silence of despair, but a vibrant, expectant hush, as if the very mountains were holding their breath. The birdsong paused, the wind died down, and for a few suspended moments, the world seemed to be listening. Then the silence was broken not by a sound, but by a powerful, visceral movement. Maria, whose pale face was often contorted in a silent grimace of nausea and pain, suddenly drew a deep, shuddering breath. Her abdomen, which had been tight and rigid with discomfort, relaxed slightly, and a soft, surprised gasp escaped her lips. "Robert," she whispered, her voice stronger, laced with an amazement that bordered on awe. "The nausea, it's gone, and I can feel the baby moving, hard, like they're cheering." Robert watched, stunned, as a wave of color seemed to flood back into her cheeks, replacing the waxen pallor that had worried him for days. He reached out and placed his palm gently on her swollen stomach, feeling a vibrant, energetic kick against his hand, a clear, resounding declaration of life. The sensation was so immediate, so undeniably physical, that it obliterated every logical argument his lawyer's mind could construct. It was a clear, undeniable refutation of the relentless, objective data of the medical reports, a miracle unfolding in real time. Maria slowly and deliberately pulled herself upright, managing to support her weight with her own strength, without reaching for the assistance of her brother's arm. A small, monumental victory. She stood tall, her eyes meeting Joshua's, filled with a gratitude too vast for words. "I feel clean," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound clarity. "Like the fire did come, and it didn't burn the seed. It burned the waste. I am stronger, Robert." Robert, the man who argued million-dollar cases with icy precision, could only stare speechless, watching his sister stand in the light. He knew her disease's progression with agonizing detail. A resurgence of this nature was impossible, utterly contrary to the established course of her terminal illness. He knew the difference between a temporary surge of adrenaline-fueled hope and this profound, sustained renewal. He had to know the source of this man's power, this quiet strength that had delivered what his money and science never could. "Joshua, how did you acquire this conviction, this faith that seems to transcend everything?" Robert asked, his voice raw with emotion. "Where did you learn to simply ask?" The firefighter smiled, a genuine warm expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I learned it on the mountains, Robert, fighting the hardest fires. I learned it from my wife, Linda Williams, formerly Sarah. She wasn't an academic or a doctor. She was a kindergarten teacher, and she taught me that when you look at a problem, a dying plant, a confused child, a runaway fire, you don't just see the destruction, you see the potential for a fresh start, the simple, undeniable presence of a power that organizes chaos. She saw life everywhere, even in the scorched earth, and she simply taught me how to talk to the one who puts the seed back in the ground." Joshua's admission, sharing the profound wisdom of a simple teacher, touched Robert deeply. It spoke to the value of perspective and the sheer human effort required to keep hope alive, far away from the insulated comfort of the corporate world. Maria stepped forward and embraced Joshua, a profound expression of maternal gratitude and spiritual connection. It was a gesture that confirmed their bond, a link forged not by chance but by destiny. "Thank you, Joshua," she whispered into his shoulder, "for reminding my brother and me how to look up." Robert stepped in, separating the embrace, not out of jealousy, but out of a desperate need to integrate this incredible man into their fragmented family. "Joshua, your belief has given my sister more than all the specialists combined. I am not a man who offers small thanks. Please, I want you to join our lives. I want you to be a mentor, a brother to Maria, and a protector to my niece or nephew. I will pay you anything. I'll set up a foundation, a trust." He trailed off, realizing his habitual solution, money, was inadequate. Joshua gently shook his head, his smile unwavering. "Robert, you're still thinking in terms of transaction. You don't buy a family, you become one. I don't need your money, but I am honored by your request. My work is here in the mountains, but if my simple belief can strengthen your family's resolve and protect Maria and your new child, then I will gladly be a part of your journey. I accept your family's heart." The sheer humility of his acceptance, the absence of any financial demand, only cemented the profound respect Robert now felt for the mountain man. The countdown was no longer 10 days. The countdown had become a chance at a new beginning. The drive back to the secluded cabin was imbued with a quiet, profound energy that neither Robert, formerly Daniel, nor Maria, formerly Eleanor, could ignore. The stark white of the discarded medical reports, now crumpled and insignificant in Robert's glove compartment, felt like relics of a distant, defeated past. Maria, resting peacefully in the plush leather seat, was no longer the frail, pain-ridden patient. She was a woman invigorated, her hands unconsciously cradling the life within her, her face illuminated by an inner certainty that transcended any diagnosis. The exhaustion was still present, a remnant of the long war her body had fought, but the acute, suffocating sense of impending doom had lifted. Upon reaching the cabin, Robert immediately began the logistical operations of confirming the unthinkable. He bypassed the local practitioner and, leveraging his deep connections, demanded an emergency remote consultation and immediate blood work performed by a private mobile lab he flew in from Seattle, a final corporate necessity to reconcile the miracle with his rational mind. 47 minutes later, the results flashed onto his secure tablet. The highly aggressive markers that indicated widespread meningeal carcinomatosis had not just retreated, they were non-detectable. The cancer had vanished, extinguished, as Maria had dreamed, by a mysterious cleansing wind. Robert, staring at the screen, felt the last bastion of his rational control crumble, not in panic, but in awe. His system, built on logic and empirical evidence, had just been permanently recalibrated by the unimaginable. He leaned against the cool glass window, overwhelmed not by financial loss or legal peril, but by pure, unadulterated forgiveness for his own stubborn, intellectual arrogance. Thank you so much for watching and being a part of our community. If you're new here and want to keep experiencing these powerful stories of transformation and hope, we warmly invite you to subscribe and make yourself at home.